By the time the opportunity arrived, she had learned one thing the hard way. Growth never announces itself politely. It doesn't wait until you feel ready. It doesn't check whether you're rested. It doesn't ask if you've healed from the last disappointment. Simply arrives and demands a response. The message came late in the evening, long after the cooking pots had cooled and the house had gone quiet. Her phone vibrated softly beside her, lighting up the small room. For a moment she ignored it. Not because she didn't care, but because she had learned that anything important usually came with weight. When she finally picked it up, she read the message once, then again, and then she set the phone down like it might burn her. It wasn't a small request. It wasn't a familiar customer. It was bigger than anything she had handled before. More food, more people, more expectations, and far less room for mistakes. Her chest tightened, not with excitement but with something closer to fear. Because this time, failure wouldn't just be embarrassing. It wouldn't just be another quiet setback she could recover from in silence. This time, failure would cost her money, trust, momentum. She sat still, listening to the gentle breathing of her children in the next room, and felt the old questions return, the ones she thought she had finally quieted. What if she couldn't keep up? What if she disappointed everyone watching? What if this was the moment the story ended? For a long time, she had believed confidence came before action, that people who succeeded did so because they were sure of themselves. Life had taught her differently. Confidence came after survival. And survival was something she already knew how to do. She had survived being overlooked. She had survived starting over. She had survived the nights when the numbers didn't add up and the mornings when her body begged her to stay in bed. She had survived worse than this. Still, knowing that didn't make the decision easier. Turning the offer down would mean safety. Accepting it would mean exposure. And exposure had always invited judgment. She thought about the people who had begun to trust her. The familiar names. The returning faces. The way expectations had quietly formed around her without her permission. She also thought about the ones who were waiting for her to fail. They had been patient so far. She picked up the phone again. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She didn't ask anyone for advice. She didn't look for reassurance. She didn't pray for certainty. She asked herself a different question. If this goes wrong, can I survive it? The answer came faster than she expected. She had already survived worse. She typed a single word. And just like that, the path became unavoidable. The next morning, reality arrived without mercy. The ingredients cost more than she had planned. The timeline was tighter than she was comfortable with. The margin for error was almost non-existent. She worked before sunrise, when the streets were still quiet and the air still cool. She worked long after sunset, when her body ached and her thoughts blurred together. Her hands hurt. Her feet throbbed. Her mind refused to rest. This wasn't the quiet struggle she had grown used to, the kind she could hide behind routine. This was visible. People noticed, not with encouragement, with expectation. Some assumed success had made things easier. Some assumed she could handle anything now. Some assumed her growth belonged to them. None of them saw the pressure multiplying behind the scenes. By the third day, exhaustion settled deep into her bones. Not the kind sleep could fix. The kind that came from carrying responsibility alone. She stood in her kitchen one morning, staring at her pots, and wondered how something that started so quietly had grown this heavy. And then, halfway through the week, something went wrong.
He should be here by
The
now.
supplier arrived late.
Sorry I'm late.
Not
Here you
by
go.
minutes.
Thank you.
By
I was getting
hours.
worried.
The message came with a brief apology. But apologies didn't stop time from moving forward. Customers were already waiting. Orders were already promised. The clock didn't care about explanations. She stood in her kitchen, phone in hand, staring at the screen while her mind raced through possibilities. Cancel everything. Delay and hope people understood. Push through and risk mistakes. Her chest tightened the way it used to when panic took over. This was the moment she recognized too well. The moment where things slipped just beyond control. In the past, this was where she disappeared. She would apologize excessively. She would blame herself. She would retreat quietly and absorb the loss alone. She felt the familiar urge rise. But she didn't move. She took a breath. Then another. And instead of hiding, she communicated. She explained the delay honestly. She adjusted what she could. She made changes in real time. Some customers left. She watched the messages come in. Polite cancellations, silent exits, disappointment she could almost feel through the screen. Hurt. But it didn't break her. Others stayed. Others waited. Others responded with patience she hadn't expected. And in that moment, she learned something no one ever prepares you for. Not everyone needs to stay. The idea felt almost wrong at first. Like admitting failure. Like letting go of something she should fight harder to keep. But as the day dragged on, she realized the truth. Trying to please everyone had always cost her more than it gave. Late that night, after everything was finally done, she sat alone at the table. The house was quiet again. The children slept. The pots were empty. The numbers sat neatly written in front of her. No applause. No celebration. Just silence. An exhaustion so deep it felt emotional. She didn't feel proud. She felt aware. Aware of how thin the line was between stability and collapse. Aware of how quickly progress could demand more than you had planned to give. Growth didn't feel like confidence. It felt like responsibility multiplying. If you've made it this far in the story, pause for a moment and like this video. It helps this story reach people who might be standing exactly where she once stood, quietly unsure if they can keep going. The days that followed were harder in a different way. Success didn't remove fear. It refined it. Instead of worrying about whether orders would come, she worried about whether she could keep up. Instead of fearing invisibility, she feared disappointment. People started asking for more. Discounts, special treatment, urgent favors. Some acted as though her growth meant unlimited access to her time. She felt the pressure building again, but this time she recognized it. She learned that boundaries were not cruelty. They were survival. Saying no felt uncomfortable at first. Each refusal carried guilt. Each boundary felt like a risk. But she also noticed something else. The people who respected her stayed. The ones who didn't drifted. And that, too, was information. One evening, after another long day, her children asked a simple question. Why do you work so much now? The question stopped her cold. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because she realized how much they had been watching. She sat with them and spoke carefully. Not about money, not about success, but about responsibility. About choosing to stand even when it's uncomfortable. About building something slowly. About not quitting just because it gets hard. They didn't fully understand. They didn't need to. They just needed to see consistency. Weeks passed. Then months. The fear didn't disappear. But it stopped controlling her. She learned to move with it instead of against it. She learned that courage wasn't loud. It was repetitive. And then, just when things felt steady enough to breathe, another setback arrived. This time the mistake was hers. Not dramatic, not public, just expensive. She realized it late at night, sitting at the table with her notebook open and her phone calculator glowing beside her. She ran the numbers again, hoping she had miscalculated. She hadn't. The loss wasn't enough to destroy everything, but it was enough to remind her how fragile progress still was. Her throat tightened. This time she didn't try to be strong. She cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly, the way people cry when they are too tired to fight it anymore. She wasn't crying because she had failed. She was crying because she was exhausted. And exhaustion didn't mean weakness. It meant she had been carrying a lot for a long time. She slept for a few hours, woke up before dawn, and started again. That was when something unexpected happened. Someone asked her for advice. Not sympathy. Not charity. Advice. A woman who was standing exactly where she once stood. Uncertain, overwhelmed, afraid to take the next step. She listened. And she spoke honestly. No exaggeration. No promises. Just truth. Later that night, the realization settled in quietly. She was no longer just surviving. She was becoming proof. Proof that quiet persistence outlasts loud doubt. Proof that failure doesn't define you, avoiding risk does. People who once doubted her began speaking differently. Some acted like they had believed all along. Others stayed silent. She didn't need acknowledgement anymore. She had something stronger. Self-trust. She stood in her kitchen one evening, looking around the same space that once felt like a trap. Same walls, same pots, same environment, but a different woman. She wasn't fearless. She was prepared. And preparation had given her something fear never could. Stability. Not the kind that guarantees safety. The kind that allows movement. If this story resonates with you, comment below. What part of her journey felt familiar? Another opportunity came quietly. Again. But this time she didn't panic. She evaluated. She planned. She asked questions. She accepted with conditions. She had learned the difference between opportunity and exploitation. And she chose wisely. By the time success arrived, it didn't feel like a celebration. Felt like confirmation. The work didn't suddenly get easier, but it became clearer, predictable, structured. The chaos that once defined her days slowly gave way to rhythm. Orders stopped surprising her. Pressure stopped shaking her. Fear stopped leading. What once felt overwhelming now felt familiar. And then something unexpected happened. People started asking where she cooked from. Not who she was. Not her story. Where her food came from. Her name began moving faster than she did. Recommendations passed quietly between offices, homes, and small gatherings. The same meals that once barely kept her afloat were now being requested days in advance. It reached a point where cooking from home was no longer enough. She knew it the moment she stood in her kitchen one evening, surrounded by containers, delivery bags stacked by the door, and her phone vibrating with orders she could no longer take. This wasn't growth anymore. It was expansion asking for permission. She didn't rush the decision. She had learned better. She planned. To save. She waited until fear stopped screaming and started advising. When she finally opened her restaurant, it wasn't flashy. But it was intentional. A warm, welcoming space in the heart of the city. Clean lines. Open windows. The smell of food that felt like memory and comfort at the same time. She named it Second Plate. Because everyone deserved another chance. Second Plate didn't explode overnight. It didn't need to. People came. They returned. They brought others. The restaurant became known not just for its food, but for how it made people feel. Full in more ways than one. She watched from the counter sometimes, not with disbelief, but with quiet pride. This wasn't luck. This was the result of showing up when quitting would have been easier. As her life expanded, old chapters tried to reopen. One afternoon, she received a message she hadn't expected. The house. The one she had been chased out of. The one that carried shame, silence, and sleepless nights. It was for sale. She didn't feel anger when she read it. She felt clarity. She didn't buy the house out of revenge. She bought it out of closure. When the keys were finally placed in her hand, she stood alone inside the familiar walls. The rooms felt smaller than she remembered. Less powerful. Less frightening. Time had shrunk them. She didn't move back in. She gave the house to her father. No speeches. No explanations. Just keys placed gently in his hand. He cried. He didn't. Some victories don't need tears. Not long after, another ghost from her past appeared. Her husband. The man who once told her to leave. The man who believed she would fail quietly and disappear. He came without confidence. Without pride. Without excuses. He stood across from her, eyes lowered, words clumsy. He apologized. For doubting her. For abandoning her. For choosing comfort over commitment. He asked for forgiveness. She listened. Really listened. Then she did something he didn't expect. She forgave him. But she didn't go back. Forgiveness, she had learned, was not permission to return. It was permission to move forward without carrying the weight. She wished him well, and closed the door gently. There was no dramatic satisfaction in that moment. Just peace. The kind that comes when you finally understand your worth. Years earlier, she had been defined by survival. Now she was defined by choice. She chose her work. She chose her boundaries. She chose her peace. Second plate grew. New locations followed. Her name became tied to excellence, not struggle. People who once whispered about her now spoke with respect. Some pretended they had always believed. She didn't correct them. Belief was no longer something she needed from others. One evening, after closing the restaurant, she stood outside and watched the city slow down. Lights flickered on. Conversations softened. The world exhaled. She thought about the woman she used to be. The one who cried in silence. The one who stayed too long. The one who feared every decision. She smiled. Not because she had become someone else, but because she had become herself, without apology. If you followed her journey this far, take a moment and like this video. Help stories like this reach people who need them. And if you're still here, subscribe to the channel. Because this wasn't just a story about success. It was about resilience. About dignity. About what happens when someone decides they will not disappear. They thought she would fail. She built anyway. And the city now knows her name.